you're a fucking civilian, and you're speculating on it, but there are certain aspects you don't fully understand.
For your opinion to matter, there's a simple thing you need to do: deploy.
Got him.
Joining us today, we have returning afrosyndicalist. Hello, Compa. Thank you for joining. Chris Perez, we got here, one of the OG Unidos contributors, and for the first time ever, the lovely Lady Izzy Bear. Thank you for coming today. One thing that I just like putting into a lot of thought that I wanted to get ahead of, one of my resolutions going into 2020 was to bring about how we as leftists, and especially those of us within marginalized groups, can extend a hand out to bring in our potential comrades from veterans, as veterans. And because, like, from my perspective with it, most veterans are disabled. They suffer from as much like class disenfranchisement as all of us do, if not more so, because of the system failing them, the VA not being funded as well as it should be, so on and so forth. But not only that, before they become soldiers, they are more oftentimes recruited out of areas where there is no other option but to join the military. And, so it's like all of these things. So it's, and for me, being in the left and coming into it, you get into a lot of discussions where fuck all cops and fuck all soldiers run in tandem. So within tonight's discussion, we're going to be talking about basically the evils of U.S. imperialism and using of lower classes to to fight their proxy wars, and how they use us as cannon fodder to line the pockets of rich assholes. I'm just gonna say, for me, like in this aspect, I need to listen, because this is the first for me. This is all new territory. Like I have veteran friends, but a majority of them still carry on that hoorah spirit, or they are, or like the one friend who is actually disabled. He ended up taking shrapnel and losing a portion of his calf. Like, it's just, whatever. He's at this point, he's indifferent. Like he's just like, look, I'm home. I don't want to think about it. Like, that's his whole stance. And it's like, I got to respect that. You know what I mean? I'm not going to force him into anything. He's a smart man. He knows what's going on. That's on him.
I mean, I think it is unreasonable to just like write off everyone who has served in the military, because like, it's like on a case by case basis. You don't know their situations, and we are all like, we are like bombarded by propaganda like 24/7, and a lot of us didn't, like, a lot of people didn't know better. So it's just
True.
Like you have to walk this tightrope. I think, like, just don't invalidate their concerns, and try to get them to open up to like allowing former military members into circles, I guess.
Like, the draft was kind of like pushed aside during the Bush years, to my understanding, was because they found a new way to propagandize enlisting into the military, and then basically exploiting rural communities, lower income communities, and immigrant communities to join. So that ended up filling their ranks faster than the draft could.
One of the huge things most people don't realize is how many people are directly and aggressively targeted from poverty. In low-income neighborhoods, everywhere I've been, There's multiple recruitment centers for multiple branches, each one having 2 or more in major urban areas. And even in small rural areas, there will be one strip mall that has a recruiter for every branch, just right there in the middle of town for everyone to get to. As well as targeting poverty. You'll never see a recruiter at a private school. It's not a thing. It'll never happen. You will see a recruiter in the cafeteria of the broke-ass public school, though, handing out free backpacks and drink bottles and telling you how great it can be every fucking time. You won't see him at Disneyland. You won't see him at Universal Studios. You'll see him at the fucking county fair, though. Like, they literally target poor rural communities and poor urban communities, because that's the only way some of these people are going to get guaranteed jobs. That's the only way that some of these people are going to get guaranteed education. That's the only way some of them could afford to pay off student loans, et cetera, et cetera. At the end of the day, your average soldier is just a working grunt trying to make it.
What can we do to move the conversation to making ourselves more inviting to potential comrades who are veterans? This is a group that has a lot of legitimate grudges with the system.
You kind of do have like 2 groups of people, I think, that come out of that. You have the people who like experience, obviously they experience all of what the military has done, and then like the government, how they use them and how they kind of just get left out on their ass, right? So that kind of, I feel like those are the veterans that are probably the most easiest to reach, I think, kind of by this kind of the context of the situation. And then you kind of have the other veterans that are just like, it's almost like they went to a different military, right? That kind that like, they're so, it's, the brainwashing is so deep that you're not going where it's not changing them. And I think those, and honestly, I feel like there's also a material difference between the two. Like, if you notice, the ones that generally do kind of like, are kind of still mired in the bullshit, essentially, materially are better off, or at least or at like a higher place than, say, the ones that who were basically grunts all their lives, that all they did were infantry, and then they're out there, no job, PTSD, and they're like, wow, this kind of fucked me up.
Yeah, so I'm Michael, and I am actually medically retired veteran. I did 6 years in the infantry and deployed twice to Afghanistan. Once as part of a conventional force and once as part of a special forces attack on. I mostly joined around 2008 when I lost my job. I didn't have a lot else going for me, and I actually have a large military tradition in my family that basically goes totally unspoken. Both my parents were in the Army. I was born in Germany. I have a brother who's in special forces. I have a younger brother who's also a medic now. Yeah, when I lost my job and didn't have a whole lot else going on, didn't have a college education back then, I decided to give it a shot and was part of the, not the main surge back in the mid 2000s, but in 2010.
What have been your guys' experience like coming back home, and you like as far as the political atmosphere back at home? And because like, were you guys leftists going into service? Did it happen after you got out? Did it happen during the whole thing? And then what was the reception within these leftist groups, once you started getting into this?
I always tended towards an anarchist view. I don't enjoy, like, even when I was in the military, it always struck me as more people doing what they could because they knew how to do it, and that was when things worked most effectively. It's when people tried to enforce some sort of arbitrary structure or hierarchy. I'll never forget, there was one mission we were on, and in the middle of us taking fire and being in a firefight, there was one of the platoon leaders was a captain who broke into the radio channel and just stopped everything to insist that he was in charge, that we all had to report through him, that all information go through him. And I wanted to tear my hair out at just insisting at the worst possible time that we had to, follow some protocol nonsense while people were in the risk of dying. And so I would say, though, that now that I've gotten out, I don't know, I kind of consider myself like a test case for socialism, because being medically retired and being having a pretty high disability through the VA, I have the luxury of cheap healthcare, and I collect money every month, and it affords me the freedom to actually be here for my daughters and to go to school and to not have a lot of the stress and strain of wondering how I would make it. I think that it is a shame that more people can't experience some of the comfort and security I have, because I think it would be a wonder for this country. I mean, it's very much something that I've had to pursue and fight for, and I mean, I've been very lucky as far as having things break my way a number of times. But I mean, it's certainly not something they've handed to me. They were very content to just see me out with no care and nothing like that. So they don't have my back.
I was an 88 mic stateside where I handled logistics and driving large trucks and everything to do with wheels. But we privately contract that out, abusing the money to pay out private corporations because somebody lobbied for that job. So when I deployed as a 19 Delta. I got a crash course in how to be a convoy security, and I got the short straw and was the gunner specifically in my truck. 2 weeks of training and then a full deployment in Iraq, where it was not the worst, but also pretty shit. Got blown up. As the gunner, was in a truck that rolled over, multiple injuries, just a really shitty time, but survived it, came through whole. We're actually really proud of the fact that we left whole, we came back whole, and we brag about that we didn't lose anyone in country, but then we immediately lost 12 people to drug overdoses or suicide in the next 2 years. So while I was there, I sustained the multiple injuries. I also had raw petroleum rained on me, which we don't know what that does long term. There's no telling. So I'm supposed to have all these fun benefits to make sure that I don't die. But as it so turns out, I was 2 weeks from my ETS date, where I was going to be able to walk out, but I was actually debating re-enlistment because they were offering me another $10,000, and that sounded really nice to me. I was out that weekend doing what I always do, cross-dressing and hiding who I really was. I got caught by someone who had been at my unit the few days prior, who worked with the VA. I was aggressively outed. I was told to walk with my honorable discharge or try to re-enlist and be outed, and I would lose everything because Don't Ask, Don't Tell had been repealed. I was in for that. It was a horrible process, but they repealed it. But that didn't cover gender identity at all. It covered sexuality when they repealed Don't Ask, Don't Tell. It wasn't until I think 6 years later that Obama specifically included trans allowance in the military. So this is where things took a violent turn for me. I did not know when I walked with my honorable that they were still going to go at me. And so now I have claim statements from the VA showing all of the things that happened to me, all the medals I earned, that honorable discharge, all the good things, but 0% claim. I literally can't even get GI Bill, much less the 15% guaranteed claim due to the raw petroleum that we don't know the long-term effects of. So I've now been out for a while. I can't even tell you how long, but for 6 years I've been unable to work. My health has gotten drastically worse and been deteriorating over time. I walk with a cane. All of my joints are fucking killing me 24/7 and pop far too often. I live with chronic back pain. I have to walk with a cane or some form of assistance, and I haven't seen a doctor in 6 years. It's pretty shit. Shoot up and spit out is the way I like to say it. There was zero regard for anything that I had done, zero regard for anything that I would have done or could have continued to be willing to do. It all came down to they don't like this one thing, so you're out. And once you're out, you're just chewed bubblegum on the concrete. There's zero they want to do for you, even though there's plenty they could.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So those 10,000, how were they giving them to you? Like all at once, throughout a year?
Well, I got the 20,000 sign-on bonus originally in 2 payments, and I never got to fully negotiate. I just got told that there was still a re-enlistment bonus for my job because at the time of Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, 88 mics was one of the most dangerous jobs because if you actually drove in country, you were at risk of IEDs. It was one of the most high fatals right there with infantry. And if you got contracted out to some other job, it still usually involved a vehicle. So that's why I pulled a 20,000 when I originally signed up, and then I had the opportunity at another 10, but never got to claim it. So I don't know the exact details of how they would have done it.
So they gave them to you in payments, basically.
Probably. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So it's crap, basically.
So when I enlisted with zero hoorah bullshit. I enlisted with no give a fuck about 9/11. I had no history of family service for like 4 or 5 generations. I was homeless on the streets. I had been since I was 13. They offered me $20,000, 3 hots and a cot, and I fucking took it in a heartbeat.
So when you guys came back, what was your so like I know, so this is very interesting because it's seriously,
yeah. If you want me to go on now that I did like the heartthrob part, I can tell you about like my actual like reintegration and what everything was. I can do that pretty easy.
okay. Yeah.
Being drunk took a whole new meaning and a whole new level after Iraq, and that's where myself and my 2 closest friends buried ourselves. We got back. We were in the National Guard. We only had to report 1 weekend out of the month. We had the rest of that month. We had fat stacks of deployment cash. We all rented a house together to keep it cheap. None of us had to fucking work. I had a significant other that lived with us who was a stripper, bringing in fat stacks of cash every fucking night. Add that to what we had bankrolled, and we were just set for ages. And we spent far too much money on alcohol and partied almost every single night of the week for a few years. And that was it for us. Like, we didn't want to do anything with society. Like, we all had our own issues. We had all seen and experienced very different things because I got put on a recovery unit. One of my friends was on a standard convoy security platoon, and one of my friends got handpicked to go and be the chauffeur for the command sergeant major. So he was just touring all of the country, driving around the big fancy brass. So we all saw and experienced different things, and like we didn't even want to talk to each other about it. Like, I know the most harrowing stories from mine, and I now know the most harrowing stories from theirs, and I know what caused all of our issues, and I know how we got all the sand in our head. But we didn't know that for like 5 years, and most of my friends are still like horrid fucking alcoholics, like massively drunk all of the time. I literally got a message at like 2 o'clock in the morning this morning. I hadn't gone to bed yet, and it was one of them, drunk as fuck, being nostalgic, and I was up until like 5 a.m.
Because I don't think anyone who like sees like goes to war sees that comes back whole. I don't know if that's even possible. But like the person that comes back and is like awakens to the system and how it actually works, and the one that goes back and just like, well, that's just how life is. Just kind of accept it as is going to be the material difference between someone who like still faces discrimination back here. Not just in the military, but just in civilian life, and then understands what that is in other like contexts, like racism or homophobia.
I mean, of course, like that's a really good point. The fact that if not to basically be really reductionist with what you were saying, but if we could just get more racists to suck more dick, maybe we could get more people on the left. That's
the cure. You hate people of color. You hate a couple of shades darker. Pop a quick one in your mouth. Just knock that out real quick. Get her done. You're out. You're good. Move on.
How do we as leftists? How do we, especially once again, those of us who have our voices, who want to be able to have conversations like this with individuals like Michael, with individuals like Izzy Bear, and any other veterans, how can we position ourselves and like how can we engage in a way, especially if there are those of us who are once again staunchly fuck all troops.
I don't know if there's necessarily can be a bridge, only because at least the way I see it, there's, at least to me, like, and I don't want to make this a centrist argument, because to me there should be a counter narrative between the support our troops, because we all kind of know that isn't functionally true. That's merely just a mask, right? When they say, obviously when the term support our troops comes in, it comes in to deflect any sort of criticism about anything, even as like the fucking president drone striking, literally critiquing that comes up, someone will come saying we have to support our troops. Like, what? That doesn't even, those two are tangentially related. And I don't know if necessarily that obviously the point is to be fuck all troops. I don't know if that's the counter narrative we should go with, but I do think that there's a clear contradiction that I don't necessarily know if there's a clean way that bridges that. But I obviously, hopefully there is, because I think that is important as well.
Phatnom.
Yeah.
I'm really interested to hear, your perspective on this.
So there's a huge difference between no longer military and those who are in. So, for example, Easy Bear, who's no longer in the military, of course, is now a leftist. But those who are in the military, they sort of have a duty, if you want to call it that, to fulfill, and that is to defend the empire. So,
well, it's not just a duty, but they have an enforced cognitive dissonance.
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, when we go for that, screw old troops or whatever, I mean, I'm not a fan of like making monoliths, but I don't know. I mean, in this case, it's kind of difficult because obviously they're not a monolith, but those who are in, what are they capable of? Like, are they capable of disobeying orders, or are they just gonna blindly just do whatever they're told?
Yeah,
there are people who will absolutely disobey. There are people who will absolutely disobey the bad orders. There 100% are, and it will not be upheld to the same as cops. One of the longest running theories of tons of people who have theorized and talked about the issues in the United States and how they could explode in the future, which is a lot closer to us now than it was to people who started theorizing this originally, all held one fact true, and that is that they do not believe any American leader could actually rise up and seize complete military power, because our military would not fucking do it. Our military will fucking refuse before it comes to killing their families and killing their friends. There will, of course, be gung-ho, diehard piece of shits that still follow those orders and go all in, but it would actually completely fracture the military, and the biggest fight would be the military fighting the military, in my opinion, and I still think that holds very true to this day.
Well, and that really comes down to the difference between action here on U.S. soil versus action overseas, because it's very easy for your average soldier to be okay going elsewhere on military adventures. But I mean, it's those same guys. That's a big thing for most military people, is that they don't see themselves as enforcers for the U.S. as a whole.
Because of the brainwashing.
Right.
Well, no, but I mean, but their fundamental motivation is the notion that they are just protecting the people they know.
So basically, when they're not fighting their own comrades, I guess, their own kin, they're willing to do anything, and they're willing to not disobey any order whatsoever. But when you bring them home to fight the system, oh no, that's a no-go zone.
Well, here's the funny thing about that, and I mean, I can speak to that pretty directly, because I know a lot of people who, like, the things that are going on in Virginia, where you have the sudden, opposition to Second Amendment rights, and they're talking about bringing in the National Guard to seize rifles and stuff. And I think this is the real place where you can actually get to most veterans, because a lot of them, and this is going to sound weird, but they don't trust the government, despite the fact that they're like working for it.
Oh, like,
He's not wrong. They're not wrong.
My question is to active soldiers.
No, I mean, even ones that are currently in, like, they have the ability to distinguish between, like, what they feel are good orders, and I mean, because
their country, they're able to distinguish between the state and their country. Is that kind of basically like how they're able to they're nationalists, essentially.
Basically, I mean, because the idea that they're going to be going into Iraq and taking guns from locals there doesn't bother them, but the idea that they could be forced to do that against their own people, I mean, they would literally riot at that point. Relating what is going on in Iraq and Iran right now with resistance to, U.S. oppression with what is potentially going on in places like Virginia. And there's a lot of times where I'll get responses from guys I know who are still in or who are veterans, and they fall silent on that point. It's if you can relate the resistance to U.S. oppression to what they see as basically democratic oppression over here, because for them it's only the Democrats who do bad things. Republicans always have their back. But if you can equate that kind of struggle, that is something that they can't necessarily push back against.
Other veteran friends that I have, they still hold this otherization. They still hold on to that
chauvinism.
Yeah, chauvinism's a good word for it. I would also put it to it like they just don't have, they find it hard for them to do to have any sort of like empathy with like the migrant crisis. They don't give a shit necessarily about like indigenous struggles like going on in Canada right now. You know what I mean? It's very hard for them to
22 on some of that because they give a serious fuck about the immigrants that were in the military with them, and they will be the first people to whoop your ass for trying to deport someone who earned it through service. Like, so like it all depends on exactly how much it's interacted with each individual veteran, because they've got those blinders on and everything has to be in their path.
Question.
That's the problem, though. It shouldn't have to be so localized. We should be able to solidarity with the global proletariat, but that's our job. We need to learn how to effectively communicate that we need to show solidarity with the global working class, with the global proletariat.
So
we need to figure out how to do that.
All right.
So what about those immigrants who did not serve? Are they willing to defend those as well?
That comes on the individualistic basis again. So like everyone has this mindset about the military that everyone in it is guaranteed super conservative. Everyone in it is like this right-leaning Republican, yada yada. When in all actuality, what you actually see is it mostly depends on where you're from, not like where you're serving, because where you're from often dictates more commonly what you've interacted with and what your life was before service. And you actually see the same kind of diversity you see in the real world. You see groups of Republicans, you see groups of Democrats, you see apolitical people, you see a fuck ton of jaded apolitical people. Like
actually, you see more.
It's slightly more reactionary than the average. Yeah.
I would it's, I mean, I understand.
Difficult.
Like,
this is very, very difficult.
I understand, because you're taking everybody from like, because like once again, we're talking about people coming in from like at the start, if you're just joining us now, one of the initial things that we discussed at the start of the stream was recruiting tactics and where the United States military does most of its recruiting, or where do they pull from. And one of the things that we talked about was this term middle class, and how the DoD doesn't necessarily say where they accumulate a lot of their resources and blah 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 blah. But for all intents and purposes, we know that just based off of where you see recruitment offices being close to, where you see recruiters posting themselves at, where you see recruitment signs being thrown up, and where and the time of day where you see on public television, or not like PBS or anything like that, but just like basic television. The amount of ads that are given, or that are sent, that are pumped out on TV to join the Navy, join the Army, join the Marines, all that shit, right? We are all cognizant, know what demographics they are gearing themselves towards to pull from. And once again, that is low income households, inner cities, migrant communities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like marginalized groups, basically. They're pulling what they can. So, and like that's not even touching what we were kind of talking about a little bit in chat, where we were talking about like
enlist.
Well, actually enlist, but also going into kind of like what Silver Spook and fuck, I'm sorry, comrade, if I forgot who initially brought this up. But the fact that a lot of recruiting comes from American colonies, Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, the fucking
because
Guam,
path to citizenship,
Samoa, all these fucking there, a lot of our soldiers and a lot of our whatever, just a lot of our soldiers come from those areas as well. And once again, there's a reason that they do that, and it's on purpose, because a lot of the times this is the only way that you can get either you can get a stable life, a stable thing. And I understand that when you take in all those people, when you take a kid from American Samoa, from the south side of Chicago, and from rural Alabama, and you try to put them all together, you have to make them all love the same country, even though none of them experience the country in the exact same way.
Yeah.
They are all oppressed. They are all feeling the problems all differently. Yeah, what's up?
I would argue you don't need to make them love the same country. You just have to make them love the guy next to them, because a lot of them, like, I mean, especially being in infantry. I mean, I knew guys from all over, and it was never about fighting for America. Like when you actually got out there in Afghanistan, you were doing the job because if you didn't, the guy next to you would have it that much harder. You were doing it because your leadership,
doing it because I am my brother's keeper.
Exactly. I mean, you don't see the big picture when you're a veteran and you're actually doing the job. I mean, that's the job of generals and fucking field officers and shit. I mean, when you're trying to talk to enlisted guys, whether or not you're an immigrant, you're different because you're a veteran. And that's something that you're just never, like, that's where veterans need to speak up and reach out to each other, because it's its own class in the minds of most veterans. It's like someone who hasn't served can't criticize.
Like a soldier, like anybody else. It's another level of.
It's separated in its own. Yeah. Although there is a really funny sort of antagonism between cops and veterans and active duty, just because it's always the cops who are going out there and getting guys who came back from deployment and they're drunk at a bar or something causing trouble, and it's the cops who wind up hemming them up when it's they're when their battle buddies are trying to just make sure that they can sleep at night and whatnot.
It's kind of sad to me to know that for you guys, the only way for you to experience collectivism is to join the military.
I mean, and it really is. I mean, I like that. Even when I was in, that was sort of something I would frequently point out to people. Is like, we're all given the same food. We are all given free healthcare. We're all issued uniforms and issued weapons. It's like the most leftist organization you can imagine, but it's filled with fucking conservatives, and it makes no goddamn sense.
I gotta chime in. Like that's what it takes to find collectivism. I think that's an analysis of any fucking situation like this. Like, we wanted as the left, right, and to feel solidarity with everyone, right? White nationalists recruit because they want the poor sad white boy who fucking feels left out and needs that community, and they find their collectivism through that. Like, every major branch of all of these things, they all target that. They all look for the people who need community and try to create their own to make them the standalone. That's just like good techniques for brainwashing. That's like Cult 101.
I mean, one of the biggest things that I think has really sort of struck me is things like the Socialist Rifle Association,
Yeah,
the SRA, because a lot of veterans see leftists as soft, and that I think is the biggest weakness, is that they see leftists as social justice warriors, as, feminists.
Oh boy, they'll be back home by winter. I mean, by Christmas. I'm sorry.
I have to quell my rage not to burn my job to the ground every fucking day, okay?
Yeah. I mean, it's like a lot of soldiers feel the same fucking way. So a lot of soldiers hate their fucking job.
You can't speak to it because you were in the driver's seat for your recruitment. I don't think I've talked about this one on my platform ever, but do y'all want to know where I met my recruiter?
Sure.
Lay it on me.
Tent City.
No shit.
Wow.
They were right out under the bridge. Well, they weren't under the bridge. They were right out beside it on the sidewalk.
There's so many of them.
And the one I was currently residing in at the time.
Damn, so I was really hoping that it was going to be an employment story. Like, it was just kind of like, hey, you know what? Since you're down there, can I ask you a question? Have you ever thought about serving your country?
Right. No, like, so where we were at, we were under a big bridge that's an interstate crossing that crosses right over a river. And it's like one of the best spots, gives a hell of a lot of weather protection, and you can fit a fuck ton of people there, and it's really hard to get to. You have to walk in by foot. You can see people coming. It's hard for the cops to raid. It's a great Tent City. So like, we were getting up and moving out that morning, and He just had a table set up on the sidewalk right at the footpath we were going to come up, the one we'd beat through the bushes ourselves. And he had thermoses full of hot coffee with National Guard written on them. He had backpacks with beanies and hand warmers and gloves.
Lanyards.
Yep. All this shit that was specifically targeted to us being homeless. Like, just had it all right there, along with documents you could go ahead and sign so he could run your basic paperwork as soon as he got back to the office if you wanted. And then you could meet him over at the office anytime that day, and he'd sit down and talk about it with you and go into depth. Like, just completely aggressively targeted.
Yeah, that's... It's why can't we get this amount of like dedication? Why can't we just get people like there to do that for homeless people without forcing them to sign their life away?
Because someone has to profit.
Yeah.
Okay, like, so that brings us into a discussion about like dual power and building parallel institutions, but I don't know. That might be best saved for another day.
Yeah,
that can be a whole nother stream. That's what I do. Yeah. I educate people on it all the fucking time.
But soldiers want to be soldiers in a dual power structure. I mean, that is the best way to reach them. They need something to be pushing back against. If you can redirect that anti-immigrant, anti-foreigner thing towards, no, you need to be pushing back against the American government. They need something to be against. That's why I'm saying like the SRA is a fucking brilliant way to bring guys in.
The question is, how do we approach because I'm part of the anti-imperialist left, and I understand their perspective. How do we engage them so that they're not immediately dismissive of all veterans? That's the question that we really need to answer. Like I said, it's a hard line to walk.
And I think this is like really unique. Also, I just want to say, welcome back, Joey. It is so good to have you,
Joey.
Hey, buddy. It's really interesting to have you two here, Izzy and Mike, just because it's a majority of the people within this community, and a lot of the panelists that are on here, we all have ties one way and another to countries that are directly affected by the neo-imperialism of the U.S. military. Like, there's issues here, there's deep-seated issues with the U.S. military. So for you guys to be being able to give your time to be on the discussion with this and being able to be as comfortable as you have been, I just want to say thank you for that.
I'm glad it's a very respectful, conversation without any any incendiary comments thrown back and forth. I really think that's a good thing.
Oh no, we can get heated. Fuck you, Michael.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. You a dick fucking driver. You're not a real fucking grunt. That's the thing is, if you're going to try and convince a veteran that the world isn't dangerous and it doesn't need people who are dangerous to push back against that, you're going to lose them.
I guess this will come to the point where I'm worried about
the
point where I think we disagree on
I'm
this
satisfied.
Is, like, rearranging that to mean like healthy protesting and like healthy organizing and healthy change. Yes. Trying to organize that right now for like some kind of a fucking accelerationism or like fucking vanguardism terrifies
There's
me.
a lot of very accelerationist veterans, and they're on the right. They want to see things get fucking sour so they can come out fucking guns blazing.
God,
I want those not to be on the right. I want them to be on the left, because in
a few generations, when it comes to actual like revolution, y'all will be really thankful for the veterans you do have, because we're gonna be the only ones who can teach you how to do what you got to fucking do. Like, that's a real fact I use with anti-military leftists all the fucking time.
Yeah, you're against the vanguard. That sounds kind of like a vanguard, but
well,
right, hold on,
a few generations. I don't think we're anywhere near a point where a revolution would do any good. I'm against. Like,
I'm hearing Joey for once. What's up?
Yes, Joey.
That's making a lot of assumptions. Number one, sure, from an American point of view, that only veterans know how to fight, but for indigenous people, we don't really rely on veterans to fight.
That's absolutely true for you, where I was speaking completely American centric. I apologize. Yeah.
I will say veteran culture is huge in North Native spaces. I I don't know, like there's this thing that, and I know this is pretty much the topic, but there's this thing that I see online where people just kind of bash all the time, veterans, like kind of paint them as in a brush. And I have a problem with that in general, just because I feel like you'll meet people who are, obviously the extreme right wingers, but you'll also see people who are lefties, who are veterans, who don't necessarily agree with imperialism and things like that, but just had to do what they had to do. So I don't understand where that disconnect comes from.
I mean, any and specifically Native groups, but any group that actually does struggle with violence, then you can reach a veteran, because that is a fundamental difference that most veterans feel they have on the average civilian, is they've stood against bullets, they've been shot at, they've had to pull the trigger, and if you can find a way to show that you've experienced
But
that
shit,
kind
so
of
has
struggle.
my mom. Like, I can push. That's my mom. My mom has had those experiences.
Yeah, and I the other thing is too is it's like I can kind of push back on that as well, because like I like knowing veterans who have an extreme prejudice against anyone in the inner city involved in gang culture. You know what I mean? Where it's just like, you're talking about people who, like, I have friends that have like literally dodged. I mean, I myself had to hide under a bed because there was, a gang shootout outside of my house as a child. You know what I'm saying? And but and I mean, I myself wasn't part of any sort of gang affiliation. But I mean, like, but also that same thing too, where it's just like, you have a soldier in the streets, or you have a soldier, for the state. That's just anecdotal. Like for me, this is all anecdotal. I don't see a whole lot of veterans giving a whole lot of credence to soldiers in the street versus soldiers of the state.
The military does, and the veterans give it to the ones who then come and serve, because they actively recruit and are willing to take people who had past gang affiliations that are willing to sever those ties. They have specific gang removal programs for enlistment to help you get out of a gang if you feel trapped in one. And they want you because you already have that experience and already know what it's like to be shot at, and you already got that fear out your system. Same with cops.
Let me ask you something. So, because this is something I've always wondered. Most of the homeless population that I've encountered, or not most, but many of the homeless population I've encountered have been veterans, and I don't understand the military's perspective, or people who serve the military perspective, to the individuals like that, and how like, is Trump doing anything up for that? Because ironically, the only person who is a Trump supporter in my family is someone who served in the military, and so to me, it's. I know a lot of propaganda is there, so I don't blame the individual. My cousin, I don't really blame him. There's a lot of propaganda and like worshiping America as an empire. But I do wonder, like, okay, so let's say we are all about like our fellow veterans. What is the army, or what is the military doing about homelessness within the veteran community, people who have
Nothing.
served?
God, Joey, I don't know you, but
Not
I
a
just
damn
need
thing.
to say I fucking love you. I love you so goddamn much, because it's the best question I've been asked all fucking night. Thank you. Jesus. Oh, God, that was so good. Okay.
Is the only thing that's one.
Mike, you want to go first, or am I taking this one? What's up?
I mean, it's one. I'll go ahead. Once the military's used you up, they don't give a fuck. It's as simple as that. You serve your purpose. You are a broken, used up, fucking worthless tool, and it's not their problem anymore. It's a problem for the VA, and the VA is underfunded.
So yeah, the military does not currently have any programs themselves that they fund with that enormous, massively inflated budget to help homeless veterans or those who have served. They don't have anything to help with. They have jobs programs, but that's just the companies that are willing to hire and say that you're a veteran who was unemployed get a tax deduction. So it's a capitalist scheme. It doesn't actually help you. It helps the corporation.
Or the contractors want to put your training to use.
Yeah. But here's the big spinoff. The only orgs that do exist like that are nonprofits that then the government endorses and promotes and tags onto all of their stuff. Like, and don't get me wrong here, a lot of these groups do amazing things like Wounded Warrior and shit like that, but none of them come from the government. Where they more commonly come from are leftist fucking libs and soft hearts and lefties who do shit like I do, that work with and create nonprofits and find things they are passionate about and help people. It is already collective action. That is the only programs that try to get these people off the fucking streets.
Yeah, it's 100% veterans organizations that work with veterans. the government has zero concern with the situation of veterans once they're out of the military. I mean, and realistically, that's why you will see a lot of disillusioned veterans who are homeless, who are also probably sympathizing for leftist ideology, but the military doesn't care because they're homeless and they're broke, so they can't do anything.
And then you'll see tons that seem really apolitical, and that's probably because they're drinking or using to put their fucking nightmares at ease so they can get some fucking sleep in that cardboard box. This goes right back to what I was saying earlier about how we openly talk about how we reach everyone else is openly talking about that solidarity and what we want and what they need, and that we understand they need that and that we care. Why can't we do that for veterans? Like, why is that not on the table? That's what I don't understand when dealing with a lot of other leftists.
What I want to know though is because can you be a veteran and not have blind nationalism? Because I meet a lot of veterans who have this, and I'm not saying all of them do, because I haven't met all the veterans, but a lot of veterans I see that didn't have this blind nationalism. Like, it's like they form a new identity when they join the army, and a lot of it has to do with blind nationalism.
No, not all veterans are blind nationalists. I mean, I can say that up front. I mean, it's a very small percentage, but there are a lot who just enlist because they want to see if they have what it takes to serve in what is in America considered the noblest profession or what have you. When I enlisted, it was because I genuinely wanted to take responsibility for what my country did. I wanted to have the decision whether or not to pull the trigger when it came to that. The proudest moment I had in my 6 years of service was one night when we were in Afghanistan. We were at a strong point. It was about 30, 35 of us in my platoon, isolated, and we were attached to another platoon of Afghan soldiers, about 20 to 30 of them. This is about 10 o'clock at night. No, it was about 9 o'clock at night. And I was on guard duty. Actually, I wasn't even on guard duty. I was tasked on just getting some of the serial numbers off the equipment. And happened to be at a guard tower location where I was with one of my good friends, the same one I mentioned who was denied his Purple Heart. And we're sitting there talking. I'm getting some of the numbers off the equipment. And out of the darkness, we hear this random Afghan dude yelling and screaming, running up with a friggin' lantern. I mean, basic ROE says pull the trigger, blow them away because it's after dark and they have no business approaching us at that point. But I told him, hey man, something doesn't feel right. Something just didn't make sense as far as some dude approaching us, trying to draw attention to himself as he's running to us. And I said, just don't, just give me 30 seconds. Give me a minute. And so him running to that position, I took off and tried to get in touch with our interpreter to get him out there to see what this dude's yelling about. I mean, if he's trying to blow us up, he's certainly doing a terrible job because he's drawing attention to himself. And as I'm trying to run the interpreter, some other people approached our front gate and they had a baby. This was a probably between 1 and 2 year old child. And I had literally just had my first daughter born, and she was about 8, 9 months old at this point. So this child gets brought to our front gate and had been doused in kerosene and lit on fire by the Taliban because the Afghans there had been working with us. The Afghans brought their daughter or son or whoever, this baby to us because in working with us, they wound up being targeted by the Taliban. And I mean, fuck US imperialism, but the Taliban's not decent either. They have no problem killing any individual who doesn't, align with their views. So this child was brought to our strong point, and over the course of about 30 to 45 minutes, one of my very close friends did everything in his power with this. I mean, he had nothing. He had, some ace bandages, some fucking like Bengay, and maybe some Tylenol in his aid station to make sure this kid survived. And I couldn't even be able to help him because I was responsible for the radios and wound up almost cussing out my commanding officer in trying to convince them to bring a helicopter to save this kid's life. And after about an hour and a half of triaging this kid, we flew him out of there. And the last I heard was that he survived long enough to get to an actual hospital. I don't know what happened after that, and I can't say that I have any ability to influence that. But that's the proudest moment I have as a veteran, was saving a child's life who otherwise might not have made it. So absolutely, there are veterans who don't buy into the nationalist rhetoric, who are in there because they feel they're doing something that is worthwhile and noble. And as far as I'm concerned, the lives I didn't take are just as important as anything I might have done otherwise, because there is the idea that the world is a dangerous place and there are people who need to be set straight or shown what America ideally stands for. I mean, we don't, but there are ideas that we do stand for. And so there are plenty of veterans who think and genuinely believe they're doing something noble and good. And if you can appeal to that in their better nature, you will have way more success in convincing them that what they want and what they believe is being perverted for the U.S. government's, overseas goals and for capitalist goals. If you can appeal to that and get them to understand how that noble desire is being used, you will reach them. It's a matter of getting through all of the layers of indoctrination and bullshit and propaganda to reach that point where you can show them, no, what you want to do is good, but what you're being used to do is not. And that, I think, is a big thing that if you want to approach veterans and try to convince them, you need to recognize they want to do good. They fundamentally do not want to be soldiers of a fucking faceless state. That's the biggest thing veterans get taught to not be, is like, we don't have the Soviet Union to fight against, but that is the polar opposite of what the military trains you to be, is some sort of
you're gonna make me cry.
No, but some blind order following goon of the state is everything that soldiers don't want to be. They want to do good, and they are being used to do bad. And if you can show them how they're being abused and taken advantage of, you will reach them. But you have to respect that notion of doing good is good, that defending against something terrible is a noble goal, and they need to be set straight as far as what the real enemy is. And I think that is if like I said, the SRA, people who do believe in respecting violence and training to use violence when necessary, you're gonna have a lot more success than just telling you that, oh, we should all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. Because you're not gonna convince anyone who's had to pull that trigger that is how the world works, because they've seen otherwise. There are bad people out there, and there are things that are worth fighting against, but it's a matter of reorienting them to fight against that you'll really reach them and show them there is a better way.
I didn't know we had a king. I thought we were an autonomous collective.
I saw someone in chat really quick. I have to answer this very serious question. It was Joey, and it's gonna weigh heavily on me. Can you be a veteran and vape? That's the real question. Okay, vaping is entirely veteran culture, and everyone else who started vaping is stealing that valor. Okay,
Hey, man.
this shit became popular on base years before they sold it in stores, and we were rolling our own coils. All right, fuck you.
I've been rolling because